Well, welcome, Allison. I am so excited that you're here on our show. I just want to let the audience know that I met you back in 2016 when we were at a local middle school, and it has sort of come full circle that our stories have sort of kind of collided, I guess. But I'm just so happy that you're on this show to share with us your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And you know what, you're right. It's interesting when you think about how things have come full circle for both of us and how there's been a lot of parallel things that have happened and similarities. And I mean, not in the best way, but in an important way. And we're both here to tell the tale, which is really important.
Right. That is pretty spectacular, actually, because I've learned so much more about breast cancer and, the statistics about breast cancer. And when I didn't even know you had breast cancer at the time that I met you. And nor did I even understand. I mean, when I finally found out, I still had so much to learn. And of course, we can't really learn enough about it until we've actually gone through it. So here I am, right? And so we've
Yeah.
connected again. I just really appreciate your being here. I would love for you to share with our audience. You had mentioned that your breast cancer journey and story didn't really fit the mold of the research and as other breast cancer population. Can you share with us your story when you were diagnosed, and anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, thanks. I think before I talk about the actual diagnosis happening, there's like some context that I think is important here to kind of highlight why I didn't fit the mold. And what's funny about this whole thing is I've never fit a mold since like day one coming out of the womb. Like I've never fit any sort of mold. So anyone who knows me really well is not surprised that like none of this fit for me, that I was like this anomaly that happened. So let's see. I had my son in 2012, Marco, my oldest. And I always really struggled with breastfeeding. It was always very painful and it just was not a process. And I did it, but it was just never a process that looked like everybody else was cruising through it. And for some reason, I just was on the struggle bus with it. And I mean, it has to be kind of graphic, the story, because of this nipple cancer that I had two different types. But to kind of paint a picture of what was happening, like my nipple would crack and bleed. It would bleed all over my son. It would just be like this messy process. And every time he was hungry, which babies are hungry all the time, my whole body would like cringe up because I knew what was going to happen. And it was super painful. And I'm somebody that has a very high pain tolerance. So I started getting anxiety around having to breastfeed him just because the bleeding would start, it wouldn't stop. I couldn't get it to stop. It was just this very odd thing. So I would go in and see my OB and I would talk to her about it. And my mom was a retired OB nurse. And she was just like, yeah, like this just looks like it's like just not working out for you. So cut to after breastfeeding him, I did that for a year. And
Wow.
so I went through that process for a year until I just felt like you have these societal pressures too of like the importance of breastfeeding. And then I would try to pump and give it to him in a bottle. And so even when I would try to pump, it would become this big issue. And I hung in there for a year until I just couldn't do it anymore. And it never healed. So it was one of these things where it would scab over and then it would open up and like weep and bleed and ooze. And then it would go through this process again. And it did that for 2 years after. And I didn't know the difference of like, it just was like, oh, I guess this is what happens with motherhood or breastfeeding. I guess this is just like what you do. So then I get pregnant with my daughter, my second child, and I'm going in for routine OB appointments. And one of the appointments, my nipple was like in bad shape. And I had been used to it for so long that I stopped bringing it up in conversation. But this particular time that I was in there, it was really painful and bleeding, and I could barely touch it. And the only way I knew how to describe it, it was like somebody had burned me with a curling iron. Like it just
Mm.
hurt. I couldn't even touch it. And it would rub on my bra. I mean, it's just a mess. But my OB was called out for an emergency C-section. So I was seeing a different doctor in the office. Someone who didn't know me, didn't know my body, didn't know anything about me. So he takes a look at it and he was like, it almost looks like a trauma wound or a burn wound. My God, that's what it feels like. It feels like a burn. So he looked at it and he was like, you know what? This isn't a big deal. We'll just wait for it to heal up and talk to, your doctor about it when you come in. So it was just kind of like, yeah. on your way. And I knew that wasn't right, but I didn't know what I didn't know. I just knew that it hurt really bad, and it's strange that this thing is not healing. Well, a month later, go in for my OB appointment, and I'm like, I'm going to ask her if she'll just take a look. And I remember saying to her, like, she's a friend of mine. I was like, can you just look at this? Like, this just does not feel right. And the look on her face when she saw it, I knew right then and there that something was wrong. And I've known this person for a long time. She is steadfast. She is focused. She is has an incredible bedside manner. And to see the reaction that she had, like, even talking about it right now, my heart's starting to pound, because I remember that moment. I went, shit, something's wrong. And she immediately got on the phone. She called Dr. Chu. I was in within 2 days to have a biopsy done. And I knew right then and there that something was wrong. And sure enough, it turns out that it was called Paget's disease of the nipple, which is a nipple cancer. And it is super, super rare. And it's like, I don't even remember the statistics on it now. I probably should have gone back and reviewed some of those things. But it is, not only is it super rare, but it next to ever happens to anyone under the age of like 60. At this point, I'm 33. So I get this wacky ass diagnosis, and I am pregnant. I am 33, and I already don't fit the mold of anybody who has breast cancer, just the different types. And so, and now it's becoming more prevalent that women under 40 are being diagnosed, and some like women under 30, but I just it didn't fit. And so after we were deciding a treatment plan and doing all those things, it turned out I also had a second type of breast cancer. I had DCIS. And so they found 2 very large tumors underneath that breast that had the Paget's disease on it. And typically Paget's is associated with DCIS. And I personally believe that I had that for a long time. And part of me having a struggle with breastfeeding Marco had to do with the fact that that nipple just like, it was already like deteriorating. And we were trying so hard to make it work. And I was probably making it a whole lot worse, by like overusing it. And so, so I ended up with these 2 types of breast cancer. And I just remember sitting there getting the phone call. I was standing, it was the day after the 4th of July. I was standing in my son's room, and he was playing out in the backyard. And I remember watching him on the swing that we had under this big mulberry tree. And I get the phone call that I had breast cancer. And I'm like holding the phone, listening to the words that are coming out of their mouth, hearing the C word, and then you instantly think death because you hear cancer and you think like, I'm going to die. I see my 3-year-old, well, at the time, 2.5, out swinging on the swing in the back, just having a heyday, playing, laughing, having fun, our dogs running around. And then I look down and I'm holding like this, 6-month pregnant belly. And I just, in that moment it was just trauma. There's no other way that I can describe it, because it's like, I'm going to die. Like I'm carrying a baby. I have another small child. Like, I'm not going to get to see my kids grow up. And it was a horribly traumatic time, and one that like, I will never, ever forget that moment in my mind. It's ingrained in my mind forever. And when I hung up the phone, it was funny. You talk about trauma. You have these like trauma responses. I go to hang up the phone, and I said, like, literally, I have my phone like this, and I'm like, okay, thanks for calling. Have a nice day. And I hang up like I had just like made an order for pizza or something, because I think I was just like in shock that I couldn't.
Yeah.
I knew that was going to be the call because I saw the look on my doctor's face. But when you hear the actual words and it all becomes solidified, it's just and I'm sure like you have your own story and experience of getting that information. It's a surreal moment in your life.
It really is. Yes. I
whole
absolutely relate. I was standing in line. I actually knew a few days prior, my radiologist called, and we were just going into a concert, and I knew I was going to get a phone call from him because I shared the results with him from another radiologist. And I remember him saying it's 95% chance or more chance that you have breast cancer. And then that following Saturday, we got the official, you have breast cancer. And it was very surreal both times. I'll never forget that either. Yeah. What a crazy story that is, Allison. That's, That's a lot. And you probably have a lot of in hindsight um, realizations about your diagnosis. And so, what kind of treatment did you go through? I know you immediately went through surgery. What other treatment did you have to go through during your journey?
Well, we had to be very, very careful about how we handled it when Simona was in utero because you can't overexpose her to radiation. And so my options were to do nothing and wait until delivery, to have a mastectomy. And I could only do that one side because we couldn't do both because she could only be under anesthesia for 60 minutes before it caused complications to her and to the pregnancy. And so we had like a 60-minute window of like, okay, if we're going to do surgery, we have to do this. I couldn't start chemo when I was pregnant. And then the other option was to abort. And to sit there and have those options presented to you, that's hard enough because there's just so many ethical concerns and dilemmas across the board of whatever decision I made, there was going to be some major ethical issue around it, and I remember my doctor saying, you have one healthy child. And that was like, oh, because I know what she's saying, like it's okay to make the decision to abort if that means that, it's going to save your life. You already have one child that is healthy that you need to take care of. And I was just like, you never know how you're going to respond or what you think, like when you hear other people's situations like that. But when you yourself were put into that position, it's extremely stressful. Because you don't know the outcome. And you can read the research and you can be told like statistically, here's like what we know, but you don't really know, and so like you don't really know exactly what the outcome is going to be. All I knew was that if I waited, it was going to be, my life was over. If I waited the 4 months to deliver her, that cancer, the stuff underneath had already progressed so quickly that I didn't think I was going to have a shot. And so to me, it was like, if my my beloved boobs that I've loved forever are going to kill me, I got to take them off. I can always get new ones put on. So I chose to do the mastectomy while I was pregnant. And then our plan was after I delivered Simona, I would breastfeed her. We'd scan the other side to make sure that there wasn't any cancer there, that it hadn't spread. And if that side was clear, I could breastfeed her for 8 weeks. And then I was going to go in and have the other side removed. And then we would start the reconstruction process. And if that was all good and fine, then no chemo. I wouldn't need anything like that if it hadn't spread. So I deliver her. She's healthy. We do the scan on the one side. The cancer had not spread. And luckily it had not gone into my lymph nodes on the other side. So I'm looking good. And they're like, hey, you've got 8 weeks to breastfeed her. You enjoy your time, but you're coming back here in 8 weeks. We'll see you back here soon. And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Well, get the 8-week clearance. You talk about like shit that happens when you have cancer. I get the 8-week clearance. And I remember right at the 8-week mark to start exercising, I'm like, Marco, we're going to go downstairs and do yoga. And I shit you not, I blew out my ACL within like the first 10 minutes of doing yoga. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yep.
Oh, my.
Yeah. Well, then imagine that conversation going in and seeing my knee doctor, who I had already seen for 3 other surgeries, like in my lifetime living here in Reno. And he was like, what is going on with you? And I'm like, I'm falling apart. My body has decided it's just giving up. So we had to do the full ACL reconstruction. I had to have bone plugs put in my kneecap because I dislocated my knee and it was like kneecap and it was deteriorating. So I had to do that. And then once I healed from that, then I went in for the other mastectomy. It was a year of hell. Like it was.
Yeah. It sounds like you and I both had pretty major surgery and then another surgery after that. And then you had 3 surgeries.
Well, and then the process, and I don't know what your experience has been like with the reconstruction. So I'd be curious to hear your experience with this, but like having the whole process, and they don't do it this way now, but having to go in and have the spacers put in. And then did you have to do that where you had the spacers put in and then they had to pump them up to stretch out your skin? So I had to have 8 treatments of those. And this was while we were working together. So they put these plastic spacers in, and then it has like this magnet where your nipples would be, and you would go in every 2 weeks and they would take this big needle and inject it through. to put saline in the spacers, because you have to slowly start stretching your skin out until you find
Yeah.
like the size that looks comfortable or right for you or whatever you want to do to put the implants in. But when they would do that, so 8 times I did that. And every time I would lose feeling in my arms. So I would have to go to work the next day, and it was like trying to type was super painful. And it was like this 24-hour thing. And then right when I would start getting feeling back in my arms, I could like be a functioning person again, or an able-bodied person. It was like right when I'd start feeling good, I'd have to go back in and have that redone.
Yeah, so I did hear about that process, and I almost went down that road. Um, I have a friend of mine who was telling me about the injections and how they really affected her, and it really hurt actually.
Mhm.
I chose the very last moment not to do it that way, and I chose to go to New Orleans to the Center for Restorative Breast Surgery, and I had the autologous surgery where it was the deep flap. It's a much more modern and newer type of surgery where they take your tissue from your abdomen area and then they reconstruct. So I had my complete mastectomy there, and right after that, reconstruction. So I woke up with new, warm, living, my tissue, my blood vessels, breasts. And that's what I
Mhm.
opted for because I just didn't want to do implants, and that was just my choice. And I have literally nothing against anything that anybody does. I just am very much an advocate for helping women know their options. And this is just something that sort of fell on my lap. I always call it kismet. I had 3 different friends who reached out to me to tell me that they knew somebody who had this autologous surgery, that I should look into it. And this started happening last summer, that I was told about this surgery, but my mind wasn't really there yet until late November when I found out that I needed a mastectomy on my left breast. And so I started really doing the research, and I called this, that is what was best for my body. So that's how I did it. But I did hear about the spacers and how,
Mhm.
how that really affects your body, and it's kind of painful. So
Mhm. It is, and the plastic
that's
is
a
really
lot for you. Mhm.
foreign thing. Yeah, it's like this foreign thing underneath your skin, and it's kind of sharp plastic. And so yeah, there's nothing about it that feels good. And I remember I was just recently hiking. I became friends with my breast surgeon, and we were out hiking not too long ago, and she was telling me about like, oh, yeah, there's this new process now that you basically like they do the incision right underneath the breast, like it's your typical implant surgery, and they clean everything out and they put them, your implants in, and then boom, you come out and you've got boobs. And I'm like, damn it, why couldn't
Oh, I
I
didn't.
have cancer 5 years later? I mean, heaven forbid. And now I'm mad that I even, like, knock on wood, that I even said that now, because I mean, I'm a believer that you throw something out to the universe, it's going to come back at you. So I did not mean that, universe. I do not want cancer to me, but I mean,
No, I mean, but didn't even know about that myself. And I know that you're a surgeon, Dr. Chu, I think you mentioned.
yeah.
Yeah, so she was originally going to be my surgeon, and she's actually the one that put my port in, and I love her. She
Mhm.
is what I really loved about Dr. Chu was that when I first met her, she talked to me a lot about nutrition, which a lot of doctors don't do. They don't really go into that, but she spent a lot of time talking to me about nutrition and what I should and should not be eating. So I just thoroughly loved Dr. Chu. She really calmed me down
Yeah.
before she put my port in, because I was in a pretty gosh darn dark place. And
Yeah.
the only reason I did not have surgery here in our city is that um, they don't do autologous surgery here. So, and that's just what I opted to do. So that's why I ended up having the mastectomy in New Orleans instead. But she is a fantastic surgeon.
She is, and
And
a perfect all around person. And she is one of the only, and I don't know a lot of doctors in town, but I know a good number. And I would say that she is one of the only ones that really centers mental health and understands
Yes.
the importance of mental health and how that goes hand in hand with all of this. And I mean, I can just not sing enough praises about her. She goes to all these different professional development and conferences on mental health. She reads all the time about it. She's always asking questions about it. And to know that she has such an investment or made an investment in
Yes.
learning more about the intersectionality of mental health and cancer is just, it's very telling to her character.
Yes, it is, because there are so many doctors who do not pay attention to that. That was one of the things I loved about the Center for Restorative Breast Surgery is that it's all about holistic health, mental health. And I mean, we were taken such good care of. And I just love the fact that Dr. Chu is focusing on that, because there's so many doctors that's just like this wham bam, here you go, have the surgery, go home, and not pay attention to your mental health. And so that makes me really, really happy to hear that. Thanks for sharing that. So you never had to go through chemo. How did you, so what about radiation afterwards?
No, we were
Not at
able to get
all.
everything. We were able to get everything out on the first shot, which I am so grateful for, because I knew that was going to be a grueling process, while pregnant, delivering a
Yes.
baby, having a child at home. And so I will never understand someone's experience having to go through something like that. I will only ever understand my experience. But I am thankful every day that I did not have to go through that next step.
Yeah, just having the cancer alone is huge. And, it's just, I have learned that, you know, I didn't realize how many different circumstances women have gone through, and men for that matter, with breast cancer. And because when I first got mine, I had a lot of people say, well, why don't they just go in there and just cut that sucker out of there? And I said, well, I guess they don't do that with my kind of breast cancer, which was the HER2 positive, estrogen and progesterone negative, where I guess if it's positive, they do the surgery first and then chemo and radiation, but mine was chemo first, shrink the tumor. Mine was about
Oh, I
5 centimeters, and then surgery. And then after I was done with surgery, when I went into my 1 week post-op, I was cancer free. So they had taken some lymph nodes, they had tested those, and I was cancer free. So I didn't have to have radiation.
yeah,
So all of these different treatments,
yeah,
and that's why I always ask everyone, what was your treatment like? Because no one's is the same, it seems,
yeah. No,
unless of
and
course you
I
have the
got
exact
really
same.
involved with the Komen. I want to say like a week after my mastectomy, I started getting involved with the Komen Foundation. And because I knew like the only way that I was really going to start to feel, um, I don't even know how to explain. I was standing in the shower. I remember this was like post-op week after, standing in the shower. And I thought to myself, I think I know how I'm going to get through this. And it's to give back, because it's going to be therapeutic for me. And I'm going to meet other people. And it's just like, no, because my friends couldn't understand what I was going through. My
Right.
family couldn't understand what I was going through. My husband at the time couldn't understand. Like no one, it was the most isolating experience I think I've ever had. And was dealing with all these emotions and fear. And I mean, just going head on into these things that are just indescribable and indescribable. You're a teacher, you help me. But it really was one of those things where I thought, I'm going to have to be very savvy about where I find my support, because God love my family and my friends, but they're not going to be able to give it to me. They don't have the capacity. And I
It's
can't be with somebody who doesn't have the capacity to understand. So I'm going to have to figure this out by myself.
right. It's interesting that you say that, because I just had an interview with my mental health therapist that I've had all year. And she said, seeking out this therapy in other places, no matter what that looks like, is definitely different than your friends and your family, because they just cannot understand what it's like at all. And it is isolating. I mean,
Mm.
I had all kinds of support. My friends just showered me, and my husband was a great caregiver, but there was nothing that any of them could do to even understand it unless they had gone through it.
No, and and
I
that's
mean,
like, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, even if they had gone through it, they understand a whole heck of a lot more than other people, but you still feel super isolated. And so it's
Yeah,
nice to talk to other people.
it is. And I think that's the part that I was overwhelmed by the amount of love and support that came out of our school alone with like the meal
Yes.
drop offs and the cards and the people that were like set up, raised enough money for me to have a house cleaner for a year. And people were helping in the best ways that they knew how. And I was overly appreciative, in fact, overwhelmed by that, of just like how giving people were in that moment and how important I was to so many people. And I had no clue. But there was a really big piece missing, and that was like no one had walked this path before that I knew. And so, in order to really start to heal and understand and kind of break apart all those things that were happening, I needed a different type of support. More than, it wasn't that I wasn't grateful for what I was already receiving, but when you look at how people help, it's important to understand how someone helps and be appreciative of that, but know like what you need as a person in order to heal and move forward. And so I had to be very specific and intentional about like where I sought out support and help, you know?
I feel like that is really and I'm going to ask you later on about the advice you would give to people. Um let's move into as you were going through this experience, what activities did you engage in? I know you were talking about Susan B. Komen and getting involved with that, but and you're a physically fit woman, and so you exercise. And what is it that you did during that time to keep yourself going as far as maybe even physical activities?
Yeah. So it's funny that you bring that up, Tomoka Dixon, Tomoka. So
Yes.
she came to me in the midst of all of this and said, I have someone that I want you to meet and I have somewhere that I want you to go. And Monday after school we're going. I just need you to bring your workout clothes. And I was like, okay. And when Dixon tells you to do something, naturally you do it. So
You
it's
pretty
like,
much
okay.
do. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So had all my stuff ready. She takes me to this gym. I meet this guy named Marcell LaGrone and I meet his wife, Tisha LaGrone, and I instantly fall in love with these two people. And they, to this day, are some of my closest and best friends. They've become like my second family. So he's a boxing trainer, and Tisha is also a trainer. And I started working out with Dixon and Tisha, and he was like our boxing trainer, and he would put us through all these grueling workouts. And I started boxing. And I tell you what, Jamie, the first punch I threw was another one of those moments that solidified. I remember he's holding up the boxing mitts, and I remember, and I've always loved to fight. Like this is like this secret of mine that like I love. And I throw this punch, and immediately I remember thinking like, why have I never done this before? Like this is all I need. This is it. And that became my thing every day. I mean, I was going in there 5 days a week, and he and I would just talk, and I would hit, and I would cry, and I would just like go through the damn thing with him daily. And he single-handedly, him and Tisha, kept me afloat. Had I not had that outlet, because there were all these emotions that I was constantly carrying. And as a mother, like I didn't have the time. I was working full time a lot of the time. I didn't have a space to like constantly I had to compartmentalize everything all the time and move on to the next thing and move on to the next thing. And granted, I was a counselor on top of that. So I was holding everybody else's shit for them too and
Mhm.
helping. And I needed a space to be able to release all of that, because that is energy that gets clogged up in your body. And I needed to have some sort of like, get it all out. And that's what boxing did for me. And I remember when we found out that had gotten a job offer up in Portland, and I was leaving the gym. And I remember thinking like, this is my lifeline. I don't know what I'm going to do without this thing. And I will forever be indebted to those two people. I love those two humans. Like I said, they've become like my second family. And I tell them often, like, I think, kept me alive. It's a very like
I need
emotional
to
thing
do
to me.
that. I really need to do that. I have a really interesting story to tell you just because you told that story. Number one, I remember you boxing. When you mentioned that, I'd forgotten it before, but now I remember you guys going to that boxing place. And several years ago, I had gone to Louisville, Kentucky to grade score some AP exams. And I went to the Muhammad Ali Museum. And Muhammad Ali had literally just died when we were on the airplane on the way to Louisville, Kentucky. And we had gone to his museum. We were staying at a hotel right near there. And guess what I brought home with me as a little souvenir? Little pink boxing gloves. Pink boxing
There you
gloves.
go. You started manifesting it.
Yes, they were sitting, they have been sitting in I have them hanging in my bedroom. They were sitting somewhere else. I think they were on my car mirror or something for a while, but then I have them in my bedroom. But isn't that interesting that they were pink? They are pink and they're boxing gloves. And I've always loved boxing as well. I mean, I used to go to Turbo Kickbox
Mhm.
all the time. And one of my favorite things to do was boxing.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
I'm
that's what
thinking I may have to do that.
you should. And
Yeah.
Dixon, she had given me a pair of pink wraps for my hands. And I just remember it was like this every time I would wrap my hands up in those, I would think of her and I would think about the significance of like why those were so important to me. And
Yes.
I give a shout out to Tisha and Marcell about, keeping me afloat, but had Dixon not approached me and said like, I think you just
Yeah.
need to come and try this thing, and she was a huge turning point for me and I wasn't in a funk. I just was trying to figure shit out. And it's like
Mhm.
she knew what I needed. And without having to overly explain, just said, like, get your ass to the gym at 5:30. I'll meet you. It's like, okay, let's go.
I call it kismet. I
Yeah.
call those moments kismet, and a lot of things like that have happened to me throughout just this one year. I mean, I'm only 1 year out from my diagnosis, and I know that we still are on a healing path. You are further along than I am, but you're still on this healing path. A lot of people think that once the diagnosis is you are cancer free, that, okay, let's all get back to normal. And you don't go
That's the
back to
biggest myth.
the
It's the
normal.
biggest myth out there. No, you don't. You don't ever go back to normal. Normal no longer exists. A new normal that you have to build exists. But that is one of the biggest myths that I like to talk about is that just because the treatment is over, it's the healing process will be lifelong. It's not over.
Mhm.
The psychological damage and fear that like will sit and reside in your nervous system in your body is not
Yes.
over. It takes a lifetime to unlearn a lot of responses and to rebuild your life in the ways that you really want to live. You get a second chance at life. It's an emotional
You do.
process. And so you
And
don't,
and you become stronger,
yeah.
you become stronger. I always hated when people told me, and I shouldn't say I hated it, because I do appreciate it and I get it. You're the strongest person I know, things like that. And it's like, I didn't feel strong in a lot of ways, but I do feel that after uh, where I am now, I do feel like a stronger person in my mind, in my heart. I have learned how to set boundaries. I have learned how to say no to people, and I've learned how to take things off of my plate that aren't
Mhm.
serving me, because before I
Yeah.
just really didn't know how to do that.
No, and I can remember many a conversation, Jamie Vaughn, in your classroom when I would walk through and check in and like check on kids or like checking in how you're doing. And there was always like some major thing going on and another
Mhm.
project and adding another thing. And we were engulfed in a lot of stress. Like I remember having a
Yeah.
lot of those conversations with you in your classroom.
Yes, I remember
You
it was. Do you know my classroom looks exactly the same? The teacher who took over in that classroom, when I left, I kind of showed him all of the stuff in there and asked if he wanted anything. He goes, "You just leave anything that you want to." I'm like, "Okay, bye. It's all yours." And I left.
Yeah.
And he did, and it looks exactly the same. It's like, great, that's perfect.
Hey, that
Those
means
were
you
the
were doing
days.
something right. That's called sustainability.
Yeah, I absolutely loved working with you and all of those kids. You mentioned that with this healing process and learning new things and trying to live your life with purpose and significance. I know in your blog you had mentioned something about what your purpose was going to be and what your like for me last February before I right after I had my thoracic surgery, I had to get my thymoma. I had another tumor that they had to take out. Um, I really had a very difficult time moving forward because I did not feel that I had any purpose whatsoever. I did not feel significant. I was Jamie Vaughn with breast cancer. And because before that, I had just retired right before my diagnosis. Literally 1 week before my diagnosis, I had a retirement party. And before that, I had all kinds of things going on. I had a full time job. I had a part time job. I had a business on the side. I had started another podcast. I had just so many different things that I was doing. And then June 11th, 2022, everything stopped. And my new focus was the breast cancer and all of the craziness that came after that, losing my hair and, just so many different things. So by February, people were thinking, okay, Jamie's getting back to her normal and things like that. And there was no normal. And so I felt no significance. My husband and I started going to therapy because of it. And we're still in therapy because I needed to understand where he was coming from. He needed to understand where I was coming from. And as you know, and we'll talk about this a little later, you know that it really takes a toll on relationships. And so I needed to figure out how I was going to be significant again. You had mentioned in your blog at some point about that significance and you started a blog. Can you share with us how that happened and how that has helped you get move through the process and then moving forward into your healing life?
Yeah, so I want to say that blog is probably 5 years old now. I'd have to go back and check the dates, but I think it's pretty close to 5 years old. I started it because I had no outlet, verbal outlet, to really talk about what was happening with me. And my ex-husband, Darren, he's always very supportive about me being open about he and like the struggles that we had during that. Because I also think that's kind of healing for him. But to be able to talk about it, but I couldn't talk to him about any of it. He shut down and I didn't have a partner anymore to be able to say like, I'm scared. And I remember I would have to hide in the laundry room and cry. I would sit up all night long and I would bawl my eyes out. I would have these horrible nightmares and I couldn't talk to my mom about it because it was so traumatic for my family that like people even seeing me, they would break down and start crying. And even my closest circle. And I felt like everybody was already planning my funeral. And so for me to be able to not have the support that I needed, and it's no one's fault. I always try to be very clear about when I explain this, that everyone else's grief and emotion about it all left me no space to be able to talk about it. And so it was like everyone expected me, as I always do with everything, to just pick it up and go and deal with it and move forward. But everybody else was having like these reactions and emotional responses. Like Bruce Meisner and Mark Scazafava sat and cried in my kitchen. And I'm sitting there trying to explain to them, what was happening. And I all of a sudden am holding space for them because they're having this emotional response. And it was like that with my mom. It was like, but I don't know what that's like as a mother to have a daughter going through cancer. So it was like I was taking care of everybody else, but there was no space for me. And so I'm a very verbal person. I will sit here and talk to you till next Tuesday if you want to. You know what I mean? Like I will just keep going. And verbal communication is how I heal. In other ways, I can do that too. But like verbally, I need to be able to speak. And I've always been a writer. And so I remember thinking, like, I've got to start journaling and getting this stuff out, because if I don't, it's causing these horrific nightmares. And I can't. Every night I'd go to sleep and I'd have these nightmares of watching my son fall off a cliff, me diving after him. Well, it was always like death. And I couldn't take it anymore. And so I started journaling. And it was like started to become my favorite thing to do late at night and early in the morning, is to try to get all that stuff out. And I'm so thankful that I did, because I was able to like chronologically record exactly what was happening with me in those moments. And then I started to think, you know what? I'm going to write a blog about this, because what I need is to be able to connect with somebody and their experience. And maybe there's somebody out there that's 33, 34, 35 and pregnant that has cancer. Maybe like, if this helps me in this way, maybe there's one other person that could help. And then I started to blog about it. And then all of a sudden it was like, you've got 20,000 views, you have 20,000 hits. And it would just like, boom, blew up. And then a publishing company contacted me and said, do you want to turn this into a book? And I was like, hell no, I'm like working on a PhD right now. I don't have time to turn this into a book. And so, and I put it on the back burner, and I thought, man, maybe I should turn it into a book. And it's like just been sitting there for so long. But I've had people reach out to me, found me on Twitter, just different social media platforms, and say like, I read your blog and I pass it along to my wife, or I did this, or I did that, or thank you so much. And that has been the coolest experience, to have somebody reach out that like, I have no clue who this person is. I don't know where they live. But to know that they found it somehow, or it found them. And, you know, they were able to have some sense of peace with me being able to share my story, was the healing factor for me. You know, like writing is healing for me. So it's just, It was an incredible experience.
Well, it is very compelling. I read quite a bit of it. In fact, I was so sucked into it last night. I think I fell asleep, reading it, because I was just so impressed by how much detail and how much you shared with your audience. And I bet you those people that you were holding space for in person, when they read it, they might have been able to process it a little bit more and then make comments and things like that. I did see some comments on there. See, to me, that is just downright inspirational, Allison. And I just think that women like us who want to make a difference in other people's lives, whether it be writing a blog, starting a podcast, whatever, volunteering, whatever it takes to help people move through this process, because it is really, really a challenging time for so many women. And knowing how many women get breast cancer, that's astounding. And
it really is.
And we need more support.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I'm so close with my mom, and I just didn't ever understand like what it meant to be a mother until I was one. And now, like, this is the part, like, it's like really emotional for me. When I delivered Simona, I remember looking at her and thinking like, oh my God, this is what it would be like for my mom when I had to tell her that I had cancer. Like, looking at this little girl, and this little girl having to call me as her mother. And so like, I could never be upset with my mom for not, you know what I mean? Like in those moments where like we just couldn't quite connect, or I couldn't quite talk about what was happening, that cancer impacts everybody in different ways. And it's a community epidemic. You know what I mean? It's a family epidemic. It is not an individual diagnosis. And everybody deals with it differently. And I mean, that kind of goes along with like the question you wanted to ask me about advice, is that it's really important to understand that people only have the capacity of what they can do. And you have to understand that people really have good intentions of wanting to help, but not everybody can help you in the ways that you want to be helped. And you have to be, like you were talking about advocacy, you have to be your own best advocate to figure out what you need, even in those moments when you have no fucking clue. You know, like, I don't know what I need. You got to figure it out. You know, you can't expect someone to say the right thing, to do the right thing, to do the things that you need them to do without communicating. Like, you've got to really turn internally and figure out what you need. Because you're the only one that knows. You know, it's not someone else's fault. And I think that that's kind of what this whole process, where it got me to, is like, my dad, Vietnam vet, badass Marine, like no one messes with my dad. My dad is like this amazing person, but locked himself in a room and bawled his eyes out on the day I got my diagnosis. And I'm like making him a grilled cheese and like trying to feed him lunch and like trying to talk to him because I didn't know. No, and so we had like this like, whoa, what is going, like role reversal. But I know that I can still be tough as nails. I can still be very like resilient, but I also can break down and cry in a heartbeat in a second. And I'm extremely emotional. And all those things make me me. You know, like none of
Well, and
those
I
things
think
are
that
weak.
that's what, yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons I really part of my advice is to find those outlets like the blog or whatever you want to do, but also going to a therapist that is not somebody that's super close to you, obviously, so that you can talk to them. And that's what I decided to do is I had a brand new one that I'd never been to, and we're together to this day. And Dr. Terry Ann Harrison, and she's amazing. I think, so for me, my mom died in 2019. And so I have a special relationship with my mom who is no longer with me, but my dad is here. And then of course I have my strong husband. And I think that with parents and husbands, they're always the ones that want to fix things, right? Or they're watching you have this disease, right? And they
Uh-huh.
can't do anything about it
Bingo.
whatsoever.
Watching you
It's
go through
out of
it
their
and then,
control. Yeah.
right.
It's
Yeah.
out of
And
your
that's one
dad's
of the,
control, out of your mom's.
yeah, like you can't expect them to know, like they feel just as hopeless and helpless.
Yeah. And then with friends, or like when you're posting on Facebook or they're sending you messages via text, sometimes people will say things that are probably not helpful, but we always need to remember that they absolutely have good intentions. And
Yeah.
that's one of the part of what I started talking about in the first episode is some of the things that people would say. So I feel like there is an episode out there where we can talk about helping people with things that they should say or should not say, or should we just let it all just go and let people say whatever they want to say? You know what I mean? I've actually gone back and forth on that one because I know when people say certain things, like whether it has to do with religion, or so I'm not a religious person, so when people would say things like, let God take care of it, or, hold on to, I'm like, well, yeah, but I'm not religious. And so what do you do with those things? What are some of the things that people may have said that you're like, that's not helpful? Like, how do we
Um,
educate people on that?
yeah,
Because I didn't even know. I mean, I've said things, I know that I have said things that are probably not helpful to people before breast cancer.
yeah, guilty as charged. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's because we don't know what to say. And, I think the thing that I always come back to is it's better to say something than nothing. And
Yeah.
I know that there's been like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Well, it's not that you don't have anything nice to say, but it's real. You can always say, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry that you're
True.
going through this. I just don't know what to say. Boom, done.
Done.
Like instead of like not saying anything and then having it sit there, and then that makes it even worse. But I think that people lean into that a lot of times because they don't know what to do. And that's okay. But it's perfectly fine to also say, I don't know how to help. I want
Yeah,
to
well
help. I don't know.
then there's the other edge of that sword, is that if people don't say anything, we kind of internalize it. Like I've had friends not say anything to me at all. And I'm like, my gosh, like I have breast cancer. Why am I not hearing from so and so at all?
Mhm.
Like this whole
Mhm.
entire time, so like friendships change. And then when you're all better, they're like, oh gosh, I've been following you and I'm so glad you're better. And it's like, well, wait,
Yeah.
where were you?
Yeah. And, that was the struggle between Darren and I, is that Darren, Darren lost his mother to leukemia when he was in his like early 20s. And I think me getting sick triggered and pulled all that stuff back up because he was his mother's caretaker and, you know, she was his hero. And then I get sick and he shut down. And then it was just like the wedge began and got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And he never communicated. And I think if he were sitting next to me today and if I would return to him and say, like, Darren, you know, what is the one thing that you wish that we would have done better, you know, going through the process, there is no doubt in my mind that he would say, like, I should have communicated. And I think that that's a weight that he's always going to have to carry for the rest of his life. And he has a lot of guilt around that. He just didn't know how. You know, when we were in therapy and we were trying all the things, but he couldn't. He could, like, capacity. We talked about capacity. But, you know, like the silence between people when things get really hard can be pretty damaging.
Yeah.
Friends,
I'm
partners,
so sorry that
lovers.
happened.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it was damaging, clearly, you know.
Now let me ask you something. I obviously you parent your kids, co-parent. How is your relationship now?
You know, I wished him happy Father's Day yesterday. I brought him a gift. We, you know, well, I'll tell you this, it's day by day. You know, we've known each other since we were 18 years old. So our relationship goes back a very long time. There are times where things have been very combative between us. And then there's times where we're very civil, you know, like we can sit at Marco's baseball games and sit and laugh and make jokes and watch him play. And then things can take a nasty turn when we disagree about something with the kids. And then we don't talk for, you know, a week or two. And so we are constantly riding the roller coaster of trying to figure things out. I think Darren and I will probably have that space with each other forever.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll ever have 100%. We get along, we're consistent, we're on the same page. We are going to continue to have bumps in the road, but the good news is we recover from them much quicker now. As we're both kind of moving on with our lives. And I will always love him as the father of my kids. Without Darren, I wouldn't have Marco and Simona. So I have a very deep admiration for him. And I have to lean into that when things get really hard between he and I with some co-parenting stuff. But we're both dedicated to be the best parents we can be to our kids. And as long as we stay focused on that, then we're good.
Yeah, and you mentioned you guys have known each other since you were 18. Were you dating at that time and then moving forward?
No, so we lived next door to each other in the dorms in college, and then we became friends, and Darren was just always around. So like I would move and then like he would be my neighbor, or like we were always like within proximity of each other. And then some time passed after we graduated from college and his mom got sick and he was taking care of her. And then after she passed, he traveled, I want to say for a little while around Europe. And I ran into him shortly after he had come back. And then that's when we started dating. But we had always been good friends and close. Yeah, so we definitely have a long history with each other, and he's going to be in my life, I mean, for the rest of my life. He's my kid's dad.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, like from such a young age too, of knowing him, we changed so much. Like you are such a different person than you were before. You're Allison at the core, this anomaly, this unique person at the core. But you've changed so much, just like I have in one year. I am Jamie Vaughn at the core, but I have so many different perspectives now. And so we just change over time. And I just feel like it's so important for caregivers, spouses, to recognize that when their partner gets a disease like this, it's not just a smooth sailing road. It's not just taking care of them by giving them their meds and taking them to their doctor's appointments. There's so much emotional parts about this. And my husband has learned quite a bit himself. He's become a lot more empathetic. And again, we're in major therapy together right now. And I'm lucky to have somebody who will do that with me. I know not everybody has that. And I know the statistics of marriages breaking up because of it. And I'm sorry that you became one of those statistics of a broken marriage. You had mentioned to me earlier about body image and dating after breast cancer and having mastectomy and things like that. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah. I've always been a very confident person with my body and very accepting of whatever it was that my body was doing. I knew for a long time that Darren and I were on a rocky road, but I wasn't going to give in to like the divorce word yet. So then after I got my mastectomy, it was like, I'm still with my partner. I don't like, he knows that my body has changed. He knows that things were different, but I didn't have to go through this process of like explaining the story to him because he was there. Like he knew the story. He knew that my body looked different. So then after we divorced, like dating was never on my radar, or I was like, no, thank you. I'm not doing any of that. And I still, have that outlook like 98% of the time. But I have been out there a little bit, and I remember the first time that I was intimate with somebody after my divorce. It was like this moment of like my shirt's coming off, and I stopped and went, shit. I have not like it's just the mastectomy scars. Like I haven't, and I don't even know if I had even talked to him about. I think he knew that no, maybe he didn't know that I had breast cancer, because I can remember in that moment stopping and being like, there's something I have to tell you, like mid shirt coming. And he was like, what? Like, I had breast cancer. And I remember he was like, congratulations. And then in that moment, you could see on his face, he was like, no, I didn't, like, it didn't come out right. I didn't mean to say that, but I could tell he was trying. And I'm like, no, what I'm trying to say is like, this isn't going to look like what you are expecting it. Like, it was like so hard to be like, I don't have nipples. You know what I mean? Like I could not get the words out. And I finally did, and everything was fine. And he was just wonderful about it and like accepting and comfortable with it, and did not make me feel like lesser of a person or like any less sexual or anything like that. But it was that moment when I went, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to like repeat the story over and over and over again. And like, what if I don't want to do that? And then I got to the point to where I'm comfortable with what my body looks like. And if somebody else has a problem with it, that's on them. Like, that's not my shit to carry. And that's not, right. And I haven't had that experience yet, but, in fact, more than not, people are like, gosh, like that's actually kind of like a sexy trait about you. But it's interesting.
Badass.
Yeah. And it's interesting because now I have nipple tattoos, so you can see the mastectomy scar straight across, but now I have like actual 3D like looking nipples, which is like it rounds off the whole thing. But that's just as of recently. But I'll tell you what, like, our breasts are so sexualized, and women are sexualized anyway, but our breasts really are sexualized, that you realize that, like I said before, I was fine with removing them because I knew that they were like out to get me. But then things just aren't the same anymore. Like now I've got a bag that's flipped and sticking out one way, and like I take off my shirt and like it just doesn't look the same. But I don't spend more than a second ever looking at it and going like, wish that was different. Like it's not worth my time or my energy.
What a great outlook. So let's go back to those nipple tattoos, because I'm going in for, it's so fascinating. I have a friend of mine who told me that, well, she had breast cancer, and then 6 years later, she went and got nipple tattoos. And she says it was the most crazy thing. She would look in the mirror, and she says it was a game changer.
Oh my gosh, I cannot tell you. So I find that I end up reconnecting with a girlfriend from high school who ends up with breast cancer. And so that was really cool. She was young too. And it was after I had gone through all my stuff. And that's who introduced me to this guy named Vinnie Myers. And Vinnie Myers is like this premier. Is that who you're going to see?
Is he the one in Baltimore?
Yeah, he has 3 locations. He's in Baltimore, he is in
San
Austin, and
Diego?
he is down in San Diego, and that's where I went.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
He
Vinny goes to, he is the one who's featured on the Center for Restorative Breast Surgery. He goes to the center, I think, like once a month.
uh-huh.
And that was the first time I had heard about, it wasn't the first time I'd heard about nipple tattoos, but him in particular. And he's very popular. I know a
Mhm.
few people who have gotten their nipple tattoos through him. And so I have to go in August to get my phase 2. That's when apparently all the magic happens. That's what I'm hearing. And so that's
Ooh.
when so my surgeon, Dr. Cabling, really did a great job with the first phase. Like my breasts look better than I had expected. I just did not realize what I was really getting myself into. And I realized so much now that it was the best thing for my body. But when I woke up and I started healing and all that, I look at my breasts and I don't have any nipples either. And I've got these scars and they definitely look different, but they're the same size. It's my same skin. It's my skin. It's, my tissue and everything. But apparently when you go back, he's going to lift and move and make them symmetrical and whatever to make them, that's when all the magic happens. That's all I hear. And so
I love it.
that is when I can do the nipple tattoos. I don't know if I'm going to do it there in August. I do know of a couple of people here in Reno who do them that I may be going to. I have a few different options, but Vinny apparently is one of the best of the best. So your nipples must look amazing.
You know what? They really do. I just like flipping my hair. Like, yes, they do.
They really. Oh,
He
yeah, here, I'll flip my hair with you. Just kidding.
yes.
I can't flip my hair
He
anymore.
right, but you know what? You did like it was there. It was there when you went like that.
I got it.
He is an extremely eccentric person. He's phenomenal at what he does. And I just watched within 60 minutes these things come to life. And thank God one of my best friends, Marty Luz Garcia, was down there with me to support me. And it's like I'm doing the thing and I sit down and I don't have any tattoos, so I don't know how the process works. And I see like the needles come out and he's mixing the color. And then pretty soon, like I'm drenched, like I sweat through the paper on the table because I'm like, shit, like this is permanent. Like now I feel like after being divorced, I'm like a commitment, like I'm scared of commitment of anything. So I see like the gun come out and I'm like, oh, no, 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 what am I doing? And it hurt like hell. And it was like this crescent size gun with 8 needles in it. He uses that to do the shading. But in 60 minutes, I look down and I'm like, oh, holy shit. I have
Wow.
actual boobs again. And I stood in the mirror and I just stared at myself for I don't even know how long because I went, oh my gosh, I was perfectly fine every morning waking up, seeing nothing in the mirror. It really didn't bother me. And so I was on the fence about like, should I do the nipples or not? And I was actually like, Dr. Janiga is my plastic surgeon, and he and I go toe to toe on lots of things. And he wanted me to get like the actual nipple reconstruction done. And I was like, no, thank you, sir. I'm not doing any of that. And so we would just like butt heads on the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But he said to me, like, don't do anything. One day you'll just know that you're ready. And that was how it was. I woke up and I'm like, okay, I could put tattoos on there. And I'm so glad I did because they just look finished.
Awesome. I love that.
Me too.
I know people who just look in the mirror and they're like, holy cow, you look amazing. Now talk about body image, because this can be very difficult for women. And, whether it be with the dating scene or just looking at yourself in the mirror. But when you hear about women looking in the mirror after they have that final touch and feel like, wow, I really like my body right now. That's big. That's a big deal. And so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I, I just, there's so much about you and your story that is so fascinating. And I just really appreciate your sharing all of the intimate details. And I know that we could probably have different episodes to go further into detail. I would like to wrap this up by talking about some of the resources that you've provided. You've provided your blog that will
Mhm.
be in the show notes, which again, to my audience, you're not going to want to, not read this. It's actually very, very compelling, and it's raw, it's real, and it is just important to read. But you also have some Instagram profiles that you put on there that I actually started following this morning. That's very fascinating. You
Yeah.
have Rethink Breast Cancer, um, Feminine Phenom, and Cancer Culture.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And I think there was the youth survival. There was a
Youth
website too.
Survival.
Yeah. I was on this mission years ago to find, resources for people who are younger, and so I was featured on the Youth Survivors Coalition. I had like a profile and was featured on there with my story. Just because they had found it compelling as well, just the whole idea of being like so young and pregnant and going through all of those things. And I've connected with people, that way. The second one was at Phenom. I don't remember her Instagram
Phenom,
handle.
Feminine Phenom. Yes, I
Yes, so
just
I've
saw really.
spoken to her. Yeah, so we actually kind of became buddies. I had reached out to her because she posts all like mastectomy photos, and she's in the gym and
Yes,
she's holding kids, and
she's
she's like,
gorgeous.
she an inside and out, and just a phenomenal person. And so her and I connected, or she and I connected. My grammar's horrible today. We connected and talked a little bit about our stories and kind of shared some information. And she's just a badass. Like, you look at her photos and you're just like, you know what? Like, she is unapologetically her. And she's inspirational to me. Like, she just doesn't care. She has accepted and embraced all that is her and her journey and her story. And so that is one that I would really like to get out there more, to give her a little bit more publicity and press, because I think that she is rewriting a narrative that is like, as women in society, like I said, we're very sexualized, breasts are sexualized. And I know that a lot of people will say they feel, you hear my dog snoring? Can you hear this?
Yeah,
He's
I
not
can.
a fan
How
of the
cute.
story that I'm telling you. He doesn't like it. He's very bored with this. That so many women will say like they felt less of a woman or less of a person when they lost their breasts. And I would personally like to rewrite that narrative and say, like, hell no, like, whatever society is deeming as important, it's important what you feel. And your value is not going to be measured by the size of your breasts or having breasts there at all. Like, you are a human being, damn it. Sexual, intellectual, loving, caring, compassionate human being. And so don't lean into that bullshit and give it more time and energy than it needs to have. Like, look at some of these people that are out there showcasing what their bodies look like. Like, I was on one of the magazine was it that I was in? It wasn't I Love Reno. My I Heart Reno, I had my blog was published in there, but there was a magazine that I did. What's the one with About Town Deb? Like, what's it called? Her magazine that she has? Bliss Babe. Bliss Babe.
I
Have you
think
heard?
so. Yes. And I think I remember, I think you posted a picture or something. You posted something
Yes.
about that, I
Yeah, and it
believe.
was like a
Yeah.
black and white photo of me with like the
Yes.
mastectomy and my pregnant belly. And it
Absolutely
was like,
beautiful.
that was important for me to put out there to say, like, like there are beauty can look however we want it to look,
Mhm.
and don't get sucked into this stereotypical idea of what we think beauty is. And that's been kind of like the fun part now about being in the dating scene and being willing to like tell somebody, you have a problem with what my body looks like that is not my problem.
Right.
Like, I value myself, and if you don't value like my story or how I look, or it makes you uncomfortable, and granted, if I was in a really intimate, like committed relationship where I was moving forward with somebody for the rest of my life, like those conversations that you have are different, but it's just, you get to a place of acceptance with yourself. And I would really like women to be able to get there and not buy into this, like I said, the stereotypical bullshit that their bodies and their breasts have to look a certain way.
Oh, right. The first time I remember my husband last summer, we were at Tahoe and we were paddleboarding, and we got out of the off the paddleboard, and we ran into one of our friends, and he says, well, how are you guys doing? And I said, well, I just found out I have breast cancer. And he says, oh, oh, are you going to lose your beautiful blonde hair? And and then when you get boobies, are they going to be bigger? Or are you going to, and he's going like this, with his hands, he's just these gestures.
Uh-huh.
I'm like,
Because we were just talking about things to
whoa,
say that are not cool.
like, whoa, like, and I actually have had a couple of people say, oh, well, hey, at least you get new, 20-year-old boobs and stuff like that. And I'm like, but I don't want 20-year-old boob. I want my own boobs. I'm in love with my breasts. So just some of the things that people say that like you were talking about, what society thinks that we should have, and as if and assuming that I want to get a boob job. Like, I never wanted a boob job before, and this actually isn't a boob job. This is I had cancer. I have something in there like that was going to kill me, and so I needed to kind of get rid of that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
And you
just
think
so
this
funny
one,
what people say.
it is. And I chose to go to have my breasts smaller. Like, I had always been a full C cup. And for as small as my frame was, I always had very large breasts. And when I got to choose the second time around, that's when Dr. Janiga was like, so you want to go the same size you were or one size bigger? And I'm like, actually, no, I want to go one size smaller. And he was like, huh? I'm like, no, I want to be
What?
like, they call it like the 300 club or whatever, where it's like 300
Yeah.
cc's or like something like where it's
Yeah.
smaller. And because that to me is like more comfortable. That's where I feel the sexiest. That's where I feel like this is what my body, like, this is, if I get to choose, this is what I would, choose to have my body look like. And I have never regretted it for a second of going smaller.
Good. You're a very confident, beautiful, beautiful person. And again, we met several years ago and I just didn't know you well. And I remember everything I do remember of you was always amazing, but just learning more about your journey and how you've gotten through it, and all of the things that came with it, and with your relationship with your husband and friends and your mom and your dad and your kids. I just feel very fortunate that you are on this episode, and I appreciate your leaving those resources, and thank you for being out there to help other women and even other, spouses to, kind of give advice on some of the things that they need to be doing, while they're being your caregiver, especially with communication, because communication is
Mhm.
just such an important part of it. So, well, thank you very much. And to my audience, I highly recommend you go into Allison's blog and read it. Did you end up putting it are you going to put it into a book, or how are you going to do that? Where is this going to go? Are you going to have a second part to this blog?
Yeah, there's something coming. There's something manifesting out there. I'm just trying to figure out exactly what that is. When I hit 7 years out, uh so Marcell's mom, her name's Lisa LaGrone, I was talking to her about it, and she's like, oh, seven is like the year of completion. And I was like 7 years out from all of this. And that's when I stopped and I went, oh, like, that is actually something really important to take into consideration, because I felt this surge during year 7, and it's like, what's completing and also what's also building and like beginning again, starting over, like rolling over and turning into something new. And so that blog is not done by any means. I just don't know what in the hell I'm going to do with it. What I'm going to do with it. Something is coming. And for anyone out there who is willing to read it, thank you so much. And just know that when you go into the link, it starts with the newest post versus the oldest. So start backwards at the earliest date, because that builds the story that way. And that way it gives you kind of an order of, what was going on. But I'm just thankful for anyone who wants to read it. So thanks for giving that plug, Jamie.
Yeah. And, well, it's a good thing that you said that, because I had to figure that out when I started reading. I'm like, wait a minute, where's the beginning?
No, I know.
Well,
Things
Allison,
a little
thank you. That's okay. I do too. Well, thank you so much again for being here. And to my audience, we'll see you next time on Test Those Breasts.